Conditional logic is one of the must-have feature in any form plugin. In this guide, I'm going to take you how you can use the conditional logic in WPForms to create dynamic forms. So let's get started. For this, what you're supposed to do is to create a new form. So for this, I've already created a form with name conditional logic. In this form now, I'm going to walk you through. It has a name, email, and subject, which is a single line text field. So for this, I'm going to display the subject only if the email field is not empty. So for that, what you're supposed to do is to click on that field, then click on Smart Logic, then enable conditional logic. So that is how to enable conditional logic in WPForms. So there are a number of options. For that, we have two options. You can either show or hide. So for example, for this, we want to show only if the email is not empty. So meaning this will not be displayed. So as soon as I save that and preview the form, this is actually how it looks like. But as soon as I start typing, that you'll see now that the subject is displayed. So these come in handy if you are accepting any submission for your site and you want all the users to have the email and to get to type the subject field. And the good thing about this subject, you can either use in the email notification to show that in your email. So after that, so this is now the basic. So there's another one of hiding. So we can hide if that is not empty. So for example, subject is still shown. As soon as I do that, is actually hidden. So that is the first part of using the conditional logic to show or hide a field based on that. Another advantage is that you can be able to use the AND logic or logic. So for example, I'm going to disable conditional logic on this particular form. Then I'm going to add paragraph field. So for the paragraph field, for this, we're going to rename as message. However, for that, we will say that I want this shown if the email is not empty, as well as an OR logic. An OR logic can only be true if either of the conditions are true. For example, for this, I'm going to say also show if the subject is not empty. So this will make a clean form for you. For example, if you enter the name, let's say test at wpforms.com, so you'll see by the fact that the email is not empty, the message is shown. However, if you want the opposite, that both the email and the subject must be true for the message to be displayed, you simply remove this and use the AND logic. So you click on AND, then you say, and subject is not empty, as you can see. So for the email, so you see, if the email is not empty and subject is not empty. So as soon as I do this at wpforms.com, it will not show, but as soon as I say subject, so this gets to display. Sometimes you do want a format in the email. And one of the things you know is that email contain at. As soon as the email contain hat, and let me remove that, it will show you that is actually a valid email. So if you say test at, as soon as you enter at, so you'll see that this will show gmail.com. So that is how now to use the conditional logic, the AND logic, and the OR logic. So the next thing that about conditional logic that you can be able to use on your form is to set conditional confirmation. For that, you have then notification. So within this notification, you can be able to send, you can enable conditional logic to send an email if, for example, you can say if email, or rather if subject is not empty. Meaning, for this, an email will only be sent if the subject is not empty. So if you want to see that, so I'm going to copy that and I say that I want it sent to my own Gmail. So I'm going to Gmail right there. So now that I have it open, you'll see, for example, if I say Mike Kipruto, then say test at mike.com.co.ke, but I leave the subject as empty and I say testing. So as soon as I send that, one of the things you will notice is that that notification will not end in my inbox. Just refresh there. So you'll see this is actually empty and that will not land to my inbox. So one of the ways to know if it didn't go is to check on tools, then you go to the logs. It should be logged by that. But because I don't have logs enabled, so I'm going to enable logs. After enabling the logs, I'm going to do the same submission, Mike, keep router, then test at Mike. All right, this is testing. Then submit. As soon as I do that, if I reload this, you'll see that a notification was not sent due to conditional logic, which is actually true for that. And in order to confirm that it goes, I can say this is Mike, keep router, then test at, then test and submit. So as soon as I submit, I expect that notification to head into my inbox. So this is actually it. So you will see that new entry conditional logic from that, which is true. And that is actually how to set it up. So that is one thing of conditional logic and on how it can be used in notification. So the advantage to this is if you're handling multiple departments, so you can be able to set multiple form submission and set different conditional logic to do that. For example, if I disable this, all right, then I say add new notification, then this is a second, I say this is a second notification. Now for the second notification, which is this, one of the things you'll notice, if I enable this and I say only send this if subject is empty, And for this, I'm going to re-enable the same conditional logic, then send if subject is not empty. And the way to distinguish this, so this is not empty. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for subject. So this is actually for the subject. So meaning if the value for that subject comes in, it's not empty. And I also want the same to go to the same email. All right. Then we're going to fill this. And for this, I'm going to add a subject. Let's say this is not an empty. And testing. All right. Then I submit. So as soon as I submit and reload this, you'll notice that now the subject is set. This is not an empty subject, and that comes in. So if we test the letter, you can say Mike, keep router, then test at WPForms.com, and we say empty subject. So of course we expect this condition, no logic, to be true because it's empty. So I'm going to submit that. As soon as I submit, I'll come back to this and reload that. So you'll see that you have a new conditional logic entry, and you can see empty subject. So that is actually how to use it. And the advantage, similar to how we were using the hand or logic, you can be able to do the same thing right here. So this comes in handy if you're running any promotional ads and you don't want to send different events depending on the number of fields that your user selects. Another thing on how to use conditional logic in WPForms is to show different conditional events depending on the submission by a user. So for example, I can go to confirmation, and for this, I'm going to add a checkbox field right here. So the checkbox field, so we have the first, second, and the third choice. So I'll come right here, then I'm going to add that. So this is the first. All right. So for first, so I'll say first choice. Okay, then we can enable conditional logic, use that if the checkbox is first choice. Then we're going to add another one, second. So I'll say the message is simply second. If conditional logic, if checkbox is second, and I'm going to add the last one, third. So the message would simply be third, then use that if checkbox is the third choice, like that. And I'm going to save this. So as soon as I save, it should reload the page. So I'm going to fill my keep router, then test that. Then for the subject, I'll simply do the subject, then I'll choose the first message. So I expect to see the first confirmation. So you can see first choice. So if you do the same, like my keep router, then test at second, then submit, you'll see that it will use the second choice and so forth. So one of the things about this is that you can be able to have different confirmation type, or rather you can show different confirmation type. For example, you can say that you want to show a page, you'd want to redirect to a page. For example, if you are running a focus lead, and after submitting this form, you'd want your users to go to a specific form or rather specific page, this comes in handy. So next week, I will be sure to take us through the different confirmation types in WP Forms, how they behave and all that, because on this video, we are only focused on conditional logic in WP Forms. Another thing of which we will look into in the future is that conditional logic in WP Forms can also be used in different integration. For example, if you're running a webhook, conditional logic to either to trigger and send that event and submit those entries to that endpoint that you've set in your webhooks. So that is it about WP Forms conditional logic. So if you have any question, feel free to leave a comment so that I can be able to reply and advise you on that. So thank you. See you next time.